It was a day like any other in the D.C. courtroom, where the sound of shuffling papers and hushed whispers filled the air. Keanu Reeves, famed for his calm demeanor, was seated quietly in the back, watching the trial unfold before him. As an actor, he had been no stranger to the spotlight, but today he found himself in the center of a different kind of attention, one he hadn't prepared for. The trial had been proceeding uneventfully until the moment it wasn't. Judge Boasberg, the seasoned jurist presiding over the case, called for a recess after a contentious exchange between the defense and prosecution. But as the court adjourned, Keanu couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He had come to this courtroom as a bystander, an observer, but something deep inside told him that this would no longer be just a passive role. And then, in an unexpected twist, Keanu did what no one anticipated. He stood up, making his way to the front of the room. His sudden movement startled the room into silence. The air grew thick with tension. The judge, whose authority had never been challenged, glanced at him with a raised eyebrow. "Mr. Reeves, is there something you'd like to say?" Judge Boasberg's voice, always composed, now carried a hint of annoyance. Keanu paused, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. He had been quietly investigating something that had been eating away at him for weeks, something he couldn't ignore any longer. His mind raced through the pieces of information he had gathered, all pointing to one undeniable truth: corruption at the highest levels of the judicial system. "I believe Judge Boasberg is not acting in good faith," Keanu said, his voice steady but full of conviction. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. The murmurs quickly turned into gasps. The defense attorney looked confused. The prosecutor seemed taken aback, unsure of what to do next. Keanu had just accused a respected judge of misconduct, publicly, in front of everyone. The judge's face turned a shade darker, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed rage. "Mr. Reeves," Boasberg began, his voice colder than before, "you are out of line. This is a court of law, not a Hollywood set." Keanu's heart pounded in his chest. He had known this moment would come. He had felt the pressure of it building, and yet there was no turning back. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Keanu continued, his voice now firmer, "I can't stand by while the truth is being hidden. I have proof. Proof that Judge Boasberg has been involved in illegal dealings that affect the outcome of this trial and others like it." The room erupted into chaos. Lawyers scrambled for their papers, the stenographer's fingers flew over the keys, and even the security officers shifted uncomfortably. Keanu's accusation had thrown the entire courtroom into disarray. But it was more than just the reaction. That took Keanu by surprise. It was the sudden realization of what he had just done. He had just put his life on the line. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt judge. This was about taking a stand against a system that had failed, and in doing so, Keanu had made himself an enemy of some very powerful people. As the judge barked orders for the court to be cleared, Keanu turned to leave, his mind racing. He knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be fraught with danger, but he couldn't back down now. The stakes had never been higher. But the real question was, would anyone believe him? And if they did, what would the consequences be? What would you do in Keanu's shoes? Would you risk everything to expose the truth, even when it could cost you your career? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more on this intense courtroom drama. Keanu Reeves had always been a man of quiet resolve, his calm demeanor and distant nature a contrast to the high-energy world of Hollywood. Born in Beirut to an English mother and an American father, Keanu's childhood was marked by constant upheaval. His parents divorced when he was young, and he grew up bouncing between homes and countries, never quite finding a place to settle. It was a life of transition and survival, and it shaped him in ways even he didn't fully understand. Despite the early struggles, Keanu's love for acting blossomed in his teenage years. He found solace in performing, and soon he was being cast in minor roles in Canadian television. But his true breakthrough came when he moved to Los Angeles, where he gained recognition in films like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Point Break. Keanu became a household name, beloved for his portrayal of characters that were often introspective, kind-hearted, and quietly heroic. On the outside, Keanu appeared to have it all: a successful career, a fan base that adored him, and a life that many would envy. But beneath the surface, there was a darkness he could never quite escape. In his personal life, Keanu had always been a loner. He never seemed to settle down, often choosing solitude over social engagements. His relationships had been brief and shrouded in heartbreak. The most significant of these was with actress Jennifer Syme, with whom he shared a profound connection. They had a daughter, Ava, but tragedy struck when Ava was stillborn. The grief was unimaginable, and it tore Keanu apart. Jennifer, too, struggled with the loss, and their relationship, already strained by the pressures of fame, eventually ended. A few years later, Jennifer died in a car accident, and Keanu was left alone to grapple with the compounded pain of loss and isolation. The years following Jennifer's death were marked by Keanu's retreat from the public eye. While still working in film, he withdrew from the media and rarely made public appearances. Despite his fame, Keanu was always more comfortable in the shadows than in the spotlight. He channeled his grief into a quiet philanthropy, often donating large sums of his earnings to causes that supported children, cancer research, and the homeless, without seeking any recognition. But it wasn't just his personal life that weighed heavily on him. In recent years, he had become increasingly disillusioned with the world around him. The same justice system that had brought him success had also left him questioning its integrity. Keanu's recent involvement in legal circles through charity, work and advocacy for underprivileged communities had exposed him to the grim realities of corruption within the very institutions he once admired. That's where his involvement with Judge Boasberg had begun. It wasn't a direct connection at first. Keanu had heard of Boasberg through friends in the legal community. The judge was widely respected, known for his fair rulings and his commitment to the law. Keanu had even met him a few times at charity galas and legal panels, where Boasberg had come across as affable and dedicated. But something had always seemed off to Keanu. A strange aura surrounded the judge, an unsettling sense that he wasn't the man he appeared to be. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place after Keanu's sister, Susan, mentioned her involvement with an underground charity that had links to Boasberg's legal work. That was when Keanu's suspicions grew. Keanu's sister, Susan, had always been a free spirit, someone who fought for the voiceless. She had spent years working with political groups advocating for marginalized communities, and it was during one of her charity trips that she had stumbled across a disturbing pattern. She had witnessed strange dealings involving Judge Boasberg, illegal financial transactions tied to corrupt political deals that ran deep into the heart of the judicial system. Susan, knowing Keanu's commitment to justice and his willingness to expose wrongdoing, had quietly shared her findings with him. At first, Keanu was hesitant. His life had already been touched by so much pain and chaos. The last thing he wanted was to dive headfirst into a web of legal corruption. But he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The more he learned, the more it became clear. Judge Boasberg was not just a figure of respect. He was a part of a system designed to manipulate the law for personal gain. Keanu knew he had to act. He couldn't just let this slide, especially when it involved his own sister's safety and the well-being of countless people who would never know the truth. But as the evidence grew, so did the stakes. Exposing Judge Boasberg meant taking on not just a man, but an entire system. The weight of his decision wasn't lost on Keanu. As he sat in that courtroom, watching Boasberg's every move, he couldn't shake the sense of inevitability. He was about to do something that would change his life forever, something that would force him to confront not only the corruption of the justice system, but his own personal demons. Keanu had always been a fighter, but this was no ordinary battle. It wasn't about fame or fortune or even his own redemption. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. Keanu's journey into the heart of corruption has only just begun. But what drives him to expose the truth at any cost? Would you have made the same decision? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more twists in this riveting tale. The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur as the break concluded. Keanu Reeves, still reeling from the bold move he had made, found himself at the center of a storm that he never expected. The judge, Boasberg, sat at the bench, his face hard and unreadable, clearly trying to regain control of the situation after the sudden disruption. Keanu, now standing in the midst of all the chaos, felt the weight of his actions settle in. As the jurors filed back in, Keanu couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. Every eye in the room was on him, their gazes heavy with expectation and judgment. He had just publicly accused one of the most respected judges in the district of corruption. The entire legal community was watching, waiting for the next move. "Order in the court." Judge Boasberg's voice cracked through the room, cutting the silence. His tone was icy now, no longer the calm authority he had once exuded. The once amicable atmosphere of the courtroom had shifted to something much darker. Keanu's lawyer, Samuel Harris, stood up, his face pale but determined. "Your Honor, I respectfully ask for a brief recess so we can discuss these serious allegations." Judge Boasberg nodded stiffly, his eyes narrowing at Keanu. "Very well. But Mr. Reeves, you will remain in this courtroom while I discuss this matter with your attorney. We do not take accusations like this lightly." The tension in the room was palpable. The lawyers, the court officers, and even the jury seemed to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Keanu tried to focus on his breathing, but his heart pounded loudly in his chest. He knew the path he had set foot on was one that led into uncharted territory. He had just opened a door, one that no one, least of all Judge Boasberg, wanted to be opened. After a brief discussion between the attorneys and Judge Boasberg, the proceedings resumed. But there was no going back now. The ripple effect of Keanu's words had already begun to spread. The case he was involved in, a seemingly ordinary civil trial, had now become a focal point of an investigation that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the legal system. As the trial continued, Keanu couldn't stop noticing the subtle changes in the room. Every decision that Judge Boasberg made seemed more scrutinized. His once strong rulings appeared more cautious, as if he were second-guessing his every move. The defense team, which had been aggressive earlier in the case, now seemed hesitant. They glanced nervously at each other, whispering quietly as if plotting their next strategy. The prosecution, on the other hand, was more aggressive than ever, sensing an opportunity to pounce on the slightest misstep from Boasberg. It wasn't just the judge under pressure anymore, it was everyone involved in the trial. Keanu realized the consequences of his actions were beginning to take root in ways he hadn't expected. What started as a singular accusation against the judge had turned into a full-blown conflict that threatened to expose a network of corruption far beyond Boasberg's reach. The more Keanu thought about it, the more he realized just how deeply embedded Boasberg was in the system. He wasn't just some rogue judge on a power trip. Keanu's research had uncovered something far darker. Boasberg was a cog in a machine that used the law to manipulate the political landscape, to silence those who sought to disrupt the status quo. He had been involved in more than just shady financial dealings. Boasberg was part of a secret network of judges and officials who were helping political figures cover up scandals, influence verdicts, and manipulate trials for personal gain. Keanu's suspicion had been correct. Judge Boasberg wasn't just a corrupt individual, he was a central player in a much larger scheme that used the judicial system as a pawn. As Keanu sat in the courtroom, trying to maintain his composure, he was suddenly struck by a new thought. This wasn't just about exposing Boasberg anymore. This was about exposing the entire system that allowed people like him to thrive. What he had started was much bigger than any one person. It was about an entire network of corruption, hidden in plain sight, wrapped in layers of bureaucracy and legalese. But as the trial continued, Keanu began to feel the weight of what he had set in motion. He knew that exposing this corruption would make him a target, and not just a target for the powerful players he was up against, but also for the media, who would surely sensationalize his involvement in the case. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal proceedings. It had become a battleground. Every word, every gesture, every look held meaning now. Keanu had made himself the enemy of some very powerful people, and the road ahead was only going to get darker. In the hours that followed, Keanu could barely focus on the trial. His thoughts raced back to his sister, Susan. What if exposing Boasberg's corruption put her in danger? She had been the first to bring the judge's activities to his attention. If Boasberg knew that Keanu was digging into his past, how far? Would he go to protect himself? Keanu's phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Susan. "I've got some new intel. Be careful, Keanu. They're watching." A chill ran down his spine. The courtroom, once a place of order and law, now felt like a prison. Everyone here had a role to play, and Keanu was no longer just an observer. He was the one being watched. The weight of the situation didn't fully hit Keanu until later that evening, as he sat alone in his hotel room, the soft hum of the city outside barely reaching him. He stared at the screen of his phone, reading and rereading Susan's message. "They're watching," she had said. He knew she wasn't speaking figuratively. People had already started to take notice of him. Keanu felt the walls of his privacy closing in. His every movement, every conversation, every breath would now be scrutinized by forces much larger than him. The room felt suffocating, as if the very air had thickened with tension. He had opened a door, but now he wasn't sure if he could close it again. His thoughts returned to Boasberg, the judge whose fall from grace had already begun in the courtroom, but the battle was far from over. Keanu knew that Boasberg wasn't a man who would take such accusations lightly. He had the power and influence to make Keanu's life a living nightmare. But it wasn't just Boasberg Keanu had to worry about. It was the network he was part of. The judge wasn't working alone. He had connections, allies, people who were deeply embedded in the system. This was a network of corruption, stretching through various powerful positions in both the legal and political arenas. Keanu had seen enough of the world to know how these systems worked. Corruption in Hollywood, on a smaller scale, was something he had always been aware of, but this was something different. The stakes were much higher. The people involved here weren't just pulling strings behind closed doors. They were influencing the lives of countless individuals, shaping the course of justice, and using the system to their advantage. This wasn't just about one man's greed or ambition. This was about a hidden war over power, fought in the shadows of the legal system. He thought back to his sister's warnings. Susan had always been more cautious than him. She was always the one to ask the tough questions, to dig deeper into situations others might ignore. She had first brought Boasberg to his attention, and now she was the one sending cryptic messages, urging him to be careful. Keanu knew she was right. The further he went down this rabbit hole, the more dangerous it became. But he couldn't stop now. Keanu didn't just want to expose Boasberg. He wanted to take down the entire network. He wanted to reveal the ugly truth about how far this corruption reached, to show the world that the system designed to protect people was instead being used to protect the guilty. He leaned back in his chair, considering his next move. He needed more evidence, something concrete that would tie Boasberg and his cronies together. But how could he get that evidence without putting himself in further danger? The answer came to him in a flash. Susan. She had been the one to uncover the judge's dealings. She knew more than she had let on. Keanu picked up the phone and dialed her number, the anticipation almost unbearable as he waited for her to pick up. "Keanu?" Susan's voice came through, a little breathless, as if she had been waiting for this call. "Susan, I need your help," he said, his voice low, urgent. "I've done something. Something I can't take back. I've accused Boasberg in court. I need everything you've found. We can't stop now." There was a long pause. Keanu could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling in the background. "Keanu, I've been digging deeper. You were right to question him, but there's more, much more. I've uncovered financial transactions, connections to political figures, even evidence of case tampering in Boasberg's past decisions. It's all there, but it's hidden in plain sight. I'll send you everything." Keanu felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was it. The breakthrough he had been waiting for. "I need this, Susan. Every last detail. We can't let him get away with this." "I know," she replied, her voice steady, "but you need to be careful. There are eyes everywhere. If they catch wind of what we're doing, you won't be safe. Neither of us will." "I can handle it," Keanu said, his voice resolute. "I've come this far. I'm not backing down now. I'll send it tonight, but promise me, Keanu, you'll be careful. You have to be. Keanu didn't answer right away. He couldn't promise her that, not with the storm he had unleashed. I'll be careful, but I have to finish this. After the call ended, Keanu sat in the dark, his mind racing. The battle was just beginning. The evidence he needed was within reach. But now the question wasn't just how to expose the truth. It was how to survive the forces that would do anything to keep it hidden. The next morning, Keanu received the encrypted email from Susan. His hands trembled as he opened the file. Inside were detailed reports, bank statements, and a series of encrypted communications between Judge Boasberg and several high-profile political figures. The transactions were extensive, involving millions of dollars, money flowing through shell companies and offshore accounts. The connections were clear. Boasberg had used his position to secure favors for the elite, helping them escape scrutiny in exchange for financial gain. Keanu scrolled through the documents, feeling the weight of each discovery pressing down on him. He had what he needed. Now he had to find a way to expose it. But as he scanned the evidence, one name caught his attention: Alexandra Holt, a powerful senator with ties to Boasberg. She was mentioned in nearly every transaction. Keanu's stomach dropped. Holt was one of the most influential figures in Washington, a senator with a spotless public record. If she was involved in this, the implications were far-reaching. Keanu knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about Judge Boasberg anymore. This was about taking down the entire network. But the deeper he got, the more dangerous it became. And, with every move he made, he couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking. Someone was bound to notice. Someone was bound to come after him. The real war, Keanu realized, wasn't being fought in the courtroom. It was being fought in the shadows where secrets lived and breathed. Keanu has uncovered the hidden truth. But with powerful enemies closing in, how far will he go to bring justice? Would you take the risk? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to stay on the edge of this thrilling journey. Keanu's hands were shaking as he read through the encrypted documents again, the evidence growing clearer with each passing second. His mind raced, and yet, amid the chaos, a cold sense of clarity took over. There was no going back now. The people involved in this web of corruption, Boasberg, Senator Holt, and the others, were too powerful, too well protected. Exposing them meant risking everything: his reputation, his safety, and possibly even his freedom. But Keanu knew there was no turning back. He had already made the choice to expose the truth, and now he would have to see it through no matter the cost. The problem was, he couldn't do it alone. Susan had given him the ammunition he needed, but he knew he needed allies, trusted people who could help him navigate the storm that was inevitably coming. And so, as dawn broke over the city, Keanu made a decision. He would reach out to the one person he trusted most in this chaotic world, his old friend and investigative journalist Mark Rinaldi. Mark had been a fixture in Keanu's life for years. The two had met while Keanu was still navigating the rough terrain of Hollywood. Mark was relentless, always digging into stories and exposing truths that others were too scared to touch. Though their lives had taken different paths, Keanu to the silver screen, Mark to the world of hard-hitting journalism, their friendship had remained strong. If anyone could help Keanu with this, it was Mark. Keanu dialed the number, his stomach tight with anticipation. After a few rings, the familiar voice came through. "Keanu, is everything okay?" Mark's voice was filled with concern. It had been a while since they'd last spoken, and the urgency in Keanu's tone immediately put Mark on alert. "I need your help, Mark," Keanu said, his voice low but steady. "It's about something big, something that goes deeper than I thought." There was a pause on the other end, and Keanu could almost hear the gears turning in Mark's head. "Tell me more." Keanu quickly summarized everything: the corruption within the judiciary, Boasberg's ties to high-ranking politicians, and the evidence Susan had uncovered. Mark listened intently, his silence speaking volumes. Keanu knew Mark was processing, everything weighing the consequences. "Damn, Keanu," Mark finally said. "So this is huge. I don't need to tell you this, but you know the risk. If we're going after Boasberg and Holt, we're not just talking about losing your career or reputation. We're talking about your life. They won't hesitate to bury you." "I know," Keanu replied, his voice unwavering, "but I can't let them get away with this. I need your help to expose them. You have the resources, the access, the ability to do it without anyone noticing." "I can't do this alone." Mark was silent for a moment longer. "All right, I'm in, but this isn't going to be easy. We need to be smart about this. No one can know we're onto them, not yet. I'll start making calls, gathering intel, but you have to promise me one thing, Keanu. No matter what happens, don't go public until we have everything. If we do this wrong, it'll be worse than if we did nothing at all." Keanu nodded, though he knew Mark couldn't see him. "I promise." As they ended the call, Keanu sat back in his chair, his mind swirling with thoughts of what was to come. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but now the real work began. They had to move carefully, quietly, and decisively. Every step would have to be calculated, every move planned, because if they made one wrong move, it could all come crashing down. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and covert exchanges. Mark worked tirelessly, using his contacts to get deeper into the network of corruption that surrounded Judge Boasberg and Senator Holt. Keanu stayed in the background, keeping his head low and making sure he wasn't drawing attention to himself. Every day the pressure mounted. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Keanu went about his usual routine, appearing at charity events and meetings, always putting on the mask of the Hollywood star everyone expected him to be. But inside, he was a man preparing for war, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then one evening the strike came. Mark had uncovered something pivotal, an encrypted email chain between Boasberg and Holt, detailing a major illegal transaction involving a prominent pharmaceutical company. The email not only confirmed the financial corruption between Boasberg and political figures, but it also revealed a massive cover-up that had been in the works for years. The details were explosive. This wasn't just about money. It was about lives that had been ruined in the process. Mark's message came through late that night. "Keanu, I've got it. The bombshell we've been waiting for. We're ready, but we need to hit them hard. The timing has to be perfect." Keanu's pulse quickened as he read the message. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. But as he stared at the screen, something gnawed at him. He couldn't help but wonder, what would it cost him? There was no turning back from this point. They were about to go public with information that could bring down powerful figures who had the means to destroy anyone in their path. Keanu knew the stakes, and as much as he wanted to expose the truth, he also knew that there was a heavy price to pay. The system was rigged, and they were about to shake it to its core. But in doing so, they risked losing everything. The next morning, Keanu and Mark met at a secure location to finalize their plan. The weight of the situation was heavy in the air as they discussed how to release the information. They agreed that the best strategy was to go to the press first, use their media connections to make sure the story got out fast and hard, with no chance for it to be buried. But as Keanu looked at Mark, his mind drifted back to his sister, Susan. She had helped him get to this point, and now he couldn't help but worry about her safety. He knew they couldn't trust anyone who might be involved in the corruption network. There were spies everywhere. The last thing he wanted was for her to become a target. "I need to go check in on Susan," Keanu said suddenly, his voice firm. "I'll be back in a few hours. You keep working on getting everything in place." Mark raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You sure you want to do that? It's dangerous." "I'll be fine," Keanu said, though his gut told him otherwise. "I just need to make sure she's safe before everything hits the fan." As Keanu left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The tension in the air felt thicker now, more suffocating. He was about to step into a world that would never let him out, and he was about to make the first move in a game with no rules. Keanu arrived at Susan's apartment with a heavy heart and an even heavier mind. The decision to visit her wasn't one he had taken lightly. The last thing he wanted was to drag her deeper into the dangerous web of corruption he had begun to unravel. But she had been the one to alert him to Boasberg's involvement in the first place. If anyone could help him see the bigger picture, it was Susan. She had always been the one with a clear head in moments of chaos. As he walked up to her front door, Keanu's steps slowed. He felt a strange tension in the air, the sense that something wasn't right. He had been preparing for a war, but he wasn't sure if the battle had already started without him. He knocked twice, and the door opened almost immediately. Susan stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear but close. "You're early," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I had to come," Keanu replied, stepping inside. "Something doesn't feel right. Are you okay?" Susan closed the door quietly behind him. She didn't speak for a moment, just looked at him as if trying to decide what to say. Finally, she let out a deep breath. "I've been thinking about this a lot, Keanu. You're getting too close to the fire. The deeper you dig, the more dangerous it gets. These people, they don't just play by the rules. They make the rules." Keanu nodded. "I know, but it's not just about Boasberg, it's about everything. If we don't expose them, if we don't take them down, they'll keep ruining lives. We can't let them keep getting away with it." Susan hesitated, and Keanu saw the worry in her eyes. He could tell she was trying to protect him, trying to keep him from going down a path she feared he couldn't come back from. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Something I should have told you sooner." Keanu leaned in, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" Susan looked around the room, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. She stepped closer, her voice barely audible now. "I've been hearing things, rumors. There are people watching you, Keanu, watching both of us. They know you've started asking questions about Boasberg. They know you've been digging into the files. I don't think they'll just sit back and let you expose them. They'll come after you." Keanu's blood ran cold. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Susan said, her eyes darkening. "I've been getting calls, anonymous ones. They're warning me to stop what I'm doing, but I haven't. I haven't stopped, Keanu. I can't. But you need to be careful." Keanu stood there, his mind spinning. His worst fears were coming to life. He had known that taking down people like Boasberg and Holt would put him in danger. But hearing it from Susan, hearing her confirm that they were watching, made it all too real. He had no idea how deep the network went or how far its reach stretched. But one thing was clear. He couldn't trust anyone. No one was safe. "I'll be careful," Keanu said, though his voice felt tight, forced. "But I can't stop now, Susan. We're too close." She nodded, but her face showed the weight of what she was saying. "I know. But just promise me one thing. If you feel like it's getting too dangerous, if you start feeling like you're in over your head, please, please back off." Keanu wasn't sure how to respond. He wanted to tell her that he would be fine, that he could handle it. But deep down, he knew that he wasn't in control anymore. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about surviving it. Later, that evening, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room, staring out at the city skyline. The quiet of the room felt suffocating, and he knew he couldn't stay there for long. The quiet was deceiving. Things were happening behind the scenes that he didn't fully understand yet, but one thing he knew for sure was that he was being hunted. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Mark. "We've got a leak. Someone tipped off Boasberg's people. They know we're coming for them. Be on high alert. I'm working on a safe place for you to lay low." Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. He had been expecting something like this. In this world of power and money, nothing was ever a secret for long. But now the clock was ticking. Whoever was leaking information about their investigation had to be close. Someone who knew exactly what Keanu and Mark were planning. They couldn't let their next move be predictable. Keanu didn't hesitate. He grabbed his bag, threw a few essentials in, and made his way out of the hotel. There was no more time to waste. The storm had arrived, and he had to make sure he was a step ahead, or risk getting swallowed up in it. As he slipped into the back seat of a nondescript car, he glanced over at the driver. It was a man he had never met before, someone Mark had arranged to take him to the safe house. The man didn't speak, but Keanu could feel the tension radiating from him. They drove in silence through the darkened streets of the city, and Keanu's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How far were Boasberg's people willing to go to protect their secrets? And how much longer could he keep running? Finally, after what felt like hours, the car stopped in front of a small, nondescript building. Keanu stepped out, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. He was deep in it now, and there was no turning back. The walls were closing in, and the only way out was through. Keanu is now on the run. But can he outsmart the people chasing him? With the pressure mounting, how much longer will he be able to stay one step ahead? Share your thoughts below and make sure to subscribe to follow the twists and turns of this high-stakes story. Keanu sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the walls as the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him. The safe house, tucked away in an inconspicuous part of the city, felt like a temporary refuge in a world quickly growing hostile. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, but inside, Keanu could almost feel the tension crackling in the air. Every movement seemed louder, every shadow felt like a potential threat. He glanced at his phone. Mark had sent him another message, this time with a brief update. "We have one of their people. Found a mole in Boasberg's office. We'll know more soon." Keanu's heart skipped a beat. A mole? That could change everything. It could be the break they needed, a way to expose the entire network from the inside out. But it also meant their enemies were closer than ever. Whoever was leaking information had their hands deep in the system, and Keanu couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even people who seemed like allies. A knock on the door jolted him. Out of his thoughts, Keanu stood up quickly, his heart racing. It was the driver, the man who had brought him here, and he hadn't spoken a word since their drive. Keanu had assumed he was simply doing his job, but now he wondered if there was more to the man than... He let on. The driver opened the door slightly, his eyes scanning the room before he stepped in. "You need to come with me," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but the look in his eyes told a different story, one of urgency. Keanu's instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. "Where are we going?" Keanu asked, his voice low. "Just follow me," the driver replied. "Mark's orders." Keanu hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Trusting Mark was all he could do now. He grabbed his bag and followed the driver out into the hallway, feeling the weight of every step, as if the walls themselves were closing in. They moved swiftly through the building, past empty rooms and darkened windows. The driver led him out. The back, where a black SUV waited, its engine running. Once inside the vehicle, Keanu turned to the driver. "What's going on? What's happening?" The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror but said nothing for a moment. Finally, he spoke. "We've been compromised. Someone's tipped off Boasberg's people about our safe house. They know where you are. We need to move." Keanu's stomach dropped. He had been expecting this. He had known that his every move would be watched, but hearing it confirmed made the situation all too real. His mind raced as the SUV sped through the city streets, the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances, occasionally flickering in the rearview mirror. The streets were empty now, the city seeming eerily quiet as Keanu's thoughts swirled. The safe house had never felt safe. Keanu had known that from the beginning, but now the danger was closing. In fast. Boasberg, Holt and their network were relentless. They would stop at nothing to silence anyone who posed a threat to their empire. And Keanu, with his knowledge of their deepest secrets, was the biggest threat of all. The driver took a sharp turn down an alley, and Keanu saw a nondescript building up ahead. It didn't look like much, just a dilapidated warehouse with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. But it was the last place anyone would look. "We're here," the driver said, as the SUV came to a halt. Keanu stepped out of the vehicle, his mind buzzing with questions. As he followed the driver into the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. Every step felt like it was leading him deeper into the heart of the storm, but there was no turning back. Now inside, the building was far from abandoned. It was sparsely furnished, with metal tables and chairs scattered around. A few people were waiting, their faces grim and tense. Keanu recognized a few of them from the small network Mark had built: journalists, hackers, and former law enforcement officers, all of them committed to taking down the people in power. Mark was there too, sitting at a table, his face drawn with fatigue but sharp with determination. "Keanu," Mark said, standing up as Keanu entered. "I'm glad you're here. We've got a problem." Keanu nodded, taking a seat. "Tell me, Mark spread out a series of documents across the table, each one more damning than the last. They were copies of bank statements, wire transfers, and encrypted communications that pointed directly to Boasberg's connections with some of the most powerful figures in Washington, D.C. But there was something else, something that hadn't been there before. A trail of evidence leading to a shadowy figure known only as the broker. "This guy," Mark said, tapping one of the documents. "He's the key. He's the one pulling the strings. Everything points to him. If we can expose him, we can bring down the whole operation." Keanu leaned in closer, studying the document. The broker was someone neither he nor Mark had encountered before. A ghost in the system, a faceless puppet master who had managed to stay hidden while controlling everything. "From behind the scenes, but we have no idea who he is, do we?" Keanu asked. Mark shook his head. "No, but I think we're getting close. We've got a few leads to follow, but it's risky. Whoever this guy is, he's good. He's not just some small-time player. He's tied to everything. Boasberg, Holt, the entire political machine. And he's got eyes everywhere." Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. The broker sounded like the kind of person who would destroy anyone who got too close to the truth. And yet, this was the only lead they had left. If they could expose the broker, they could bring the entire operation crashing down. But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Every step forward seemed to bring them closer to the point of no return. He looked around at the people gathered in the room. Each one of them had risked everything to be here, to fight for the truth. They were all in this together, but none of them knew what the consequences of their actions would be. "We can't wait any longer," Keanu said, his voice firm. "We need to go after him now, before they get to us first." Mark looked at him, a mixture of concern and determination in his eyes. "We're already in it, Keanu. There's no turning back. Let's finish this." As they prepared to move, Keanu's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Susan. "They're coming for you. Be careful. I've made some arrangements. If you can, get out of the city. Trust no one." Keanu's heart raced. The walls were closing in on all sides, but there was no more time for caution. The final move had to be made. And soon, Keanu stepped out of the building with Mark and the others, the weight of what was happening sinking in deeper with every step. The city around them seemed so ordinary, so unsuspecting. Yet beneath the surface, everything was crumbling. Keanu had known the stakes were high when he first started digging into Boasberg's dealings, but now it felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. If he took one wrong step, everything would come crashing down. Mark's team had already set things in motion. They were preparing to track down the broker, the mysterious figure who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. The files on the table back at the safe house had given them their first real lead, but it wasn't enough. Keanu knew that finding the broker was just the first step in a much larger game, and if they didn't move fast, the game would be over. Before they even had a chance, they got into an unmarked van, the same one they had used to transport Keanu here earlier. It was a nondescript vehicle, perfect for blending in with the rest of the city's traffic. Inside, the team was already gearing up, huddled around laptops, scanning the data they had gathered on Boasberg and the broker. Every second felt like it counted. Keanu could feel his pulse quicken as they drove toward their next destination. Mark sat beside him, flipping through the papers that had been scattered across the table back at the safe house. "This is it," Mark muttered, his voice low and tense. "The broker doesn't leave a trail, but we've finally caught a break." Keanu nodded but said nothing. He knew what this was, the moment they'd been waiting for. But a sick feeling in his stomach told him they were walking into something far more dangerous than they realized. The van turned down a narrow, dimly lit alley, stopping in front of an unmarked building with security cameras monitoring every angle. The place looked abandoned, but Keanu knew better. The broker had eyes everywhere. There was no way they would have gotten this far if they didn't know about it. Mark gave a quick glance around, checking the perimeter before speaking. "This is where we think the broker might be operating out of. We've had people monitoring this place for a few days, but they've been careful. No one has come in or out without covering their tracks. We can't take any chances." Keanu's eyes narrowed as he looked up at the building. It was fortified, nearly impenetrable. But then again, the broker wasn't the kind of person who'd make mistakes. He was a ghost, someone who knew how to manipulate the system in ways Keanu couldn't yet understand. "We move fast," Keanu said, his voice quiet but firm. "We go in, we get what we need, and we get out before they know we're here." Mark gave a curt nod, and the team sprang into action. They were professionals, each member skilled in their own right, from hacking into systems to gathering intel under the radar. But even with their expertise, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were outmatched. They were up against a force that had been operating in the shadows for years, and every move they made was being watched. Inside the building, the atmosphere was thick with tension. They moved silently through the narrow hallways, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. The air smelled stale, and the dim lighting only added to the sense of unease that hung in the air. It felt like they were intruding on something that was never meant to be discovered. Keanu's heart beat faster as they reached the final door at the end of the hall. Mark gestured to the team to stand back, signaling that he was about to breach. Keanu's eyes stayed focused on the door. There was no turning back now. Mark's hand was steady as he pressed a button on the keypad next to the door. The door clicked open, and they piled inside, moving swiftly. What they found inside was nothing like Keanu expected. It wasn't a high-tech lair filled with monitors and servers like the ones he had imagined. Instead, the room was small and sparsely furnished, just a few desks, stacks of paperwork, and a lone figure sitting at a computer. The person at the desk didn't even look up when they entered. The figure was hunched over, working intently on something that wasn't visible to Keanu. A chill ran down Keanu's spine. Whoever this was, they had been expecting them. Mark stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "We know who you are. We know what you've been doing. It's over." The figure at the desk froze for a moment, then slowly turned around. The face that met Keanu's eyes wasn't what he had expected. The person wasn't wearing a suit or the dark, menacing persona that Keanu had pictured. Instead, it was a woman, middle-aged, with short, cropped brown hair and a pair of glasses perched on her nose. She had the appearance of someone who could be an office worker, a librarian even. She smiled softly, almost wistfully, as she met their gazes. "So you've finally found me," she said, her voice calm, like they were just catching up over coffee. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting this. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice tight with disbelief. This wasn't how he had imagined the broker. The woman chuckled. "You don't know me, do you? That's okay. You never were supposed to." Keanu felt a cold shiver down his spine. Something about the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, told him that she had been watching them from the very beginning. "I've been waiting for you," she continued, her smile growing wider. "You're not the first to come looking for me, but I will be the last person you'll ever find." As the tension built in the room, Keanu realized something crucial. They weren't here to find answers. They were here to be silenced. The woman wasn't the broker. She was just another piece of the puzzle, a pawn in a much larger game. Keanu felt a chill as the realization hit him. The broker wasn't just a person. They were a system, and this system was far more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. "Get her out of here," Keanu said to Mark, his voice sharp. He could feel his grip on the situation slipping away. "We need to leave. Now." But as they moved quickly to contain the situation, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked straight into a trap. The broker's web was far more intricate than they realized, and now they were caught right in the middle of it. The van sped through the narrow streets, the screech of tires on the asphalt breaking the quiet of the night. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The woman they had just confronted wasn't who they thought she was. She wasn't just a mole or a low-level operative. No, she was something much bigger. The broker was still out there, and now the noose was tightening around them. Inside the van, Mark sat next to Keanu, his face a mixture of frustration and disbelief. The woman had said little before they took her into custody, but her words lingered in Keanu's mind, growing heavier with every passing second. "I've been waiting for you." What did she mean by that? Was she part of some larger plan? Or had she just been trying to throw them off course? Keanu clenched his fists, feeling the weight of every unanswered question pressing on him. They couldn't afford mistakes now. If the broker was always a step ahead, then they had to be faster, smarter. But Keanu knew the truth. This wasn't a game they were playing anymore. This was survival. "Where are we going?" Keanu asked, his voice low. He turned to Mark, trying to keep the edge of his panic in check. "We're going to the safe house," Mark replied, his tone grave. We've got to rethink this. We've got one of the broker's people, but we're still in the dark about everything else. The woman we picked up..." He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. "She's not going to talk, and I have a feeling there's more at play here than just a rogue network." Keanu's stomach tightened. He couldn't afford to let the feeling of uncertainty creep in. Not now. "Then we'll make her talk," he said, his voice resolute. But even as he said the words, he couldn't help but wonder, could they break her? Or had they just stirred the hornet's nest without realizing it? When they reached the safe house, the place was dark and quiet. Keanu barely noticed the details of the building anymore. He had been here too many times, each visit marked by the same anxious sense of impending danger. The crew was already inside, ready for the next move, but this time there was no time to waste. The woman they'd captured was sitting in one of the back rooms, hands cuffed to a chair, her gaze empty and distant. Keanu's heart pounded as he stepped into the room, his eyes meeting hers. She didn't flinch, didn't show a sign of fear. If anything, she looked almost bored. It unnerved him. "Who are you?" Keanu asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Controlled. She looked up at him and smiled, her lips curling in an almost pitying way. "I'm just a piece of the puzzle, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice soft but sharp with a strange kind of calm. "You think you're close, don't you? But you're not even scratching the surface." Keanu's jaw tightened. He had hoped she might break, might give them something to go on, but it was clear she was playing a different game entirely. This woman, whoever she was, had been trained to resist, to outlast. But Keanu couldn't afford to back down now. "Why? Are you helping the broker?" he pressed. She tilted her head slightly as if amused by the question. "Helping? I'm not helping anyone. I'm just doing what I've always done. Survival. And you, Keanu, you're just another cog in the machine." "Survival?" Keanu scoffed, stepping closer. "By betraying people, by playing both sides, that's not survival, that's destruction." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment it felt like they were in a standoff, two predators circling one another. Finally she spoke, her voice dripping with cold amusement. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said. "The broker isn't some villain to be defeated. The broker is a force of nature. The system is broken, Keanu, and we're just cleaning up the mess. You think you can expose him, but the truth is you've already lost." Keanu's anger flared. He leaned in, his voice low and intense. "You're wrong. I'm not going to let the broker keep controlling everything. I'll bring this system down." The woman's lips twitched upward. "You think you're the first person to try?" Keanu's mind raced, but he refused to show weakness. He turned to Mark, signaling for him to get the team ready. They needed to do this quickly, before things escalated any further. But just as he turned to leave, the woman's voice stopped him in his tracks. "You don't have the full picture yet," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "You think the broker is the puppet master, but there's someone else, someone even more dangerous. Someone pulling the strings behind the scenes, and you won't know who they are until it's too late." Keanu froze, his hand on the door. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "Who?" he demanded, but she said nothing. Her eyes remained cold, distant, as if the words she had spoken had already lost their meaning. Mark's voice interrupted the moment. "Keanu, we need to move now." Reluctantly, Keanu stepped out of the room, the woman's words echoing in his mind. There was more to this than they realized. The broker wasn't the end of the line. There was a higher power at work, and Keanu didn't know if they had the strength to face it. As the team prepared to leave, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. The walls were closing in fast. There were too many pieces to the puzzle, too many secrets hidden behind layers of lies. Whoever was behind the broker was even more dangerous than they had imagined, but there was no turning back now. They had to keep moving forward. The night air was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken truths, and the van hummed along the darkened streets, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Keanu's mind was a swirl of confusion, uncertainty, and adrenaline. Everything was pointing toward a revelation that felt both impossible and inevitable. The woman they had captured had dropped a bombshell. There was someone even more powerful than the broker, someone operating from the shadows. Someone who was far more dangerous. Mark was sitting beside him, flipping through the encrypted files on his laptop, but even he looked like he was struggling to piece everything together. Keanu could feel the tension in the van, the knowledge that this wasn't just another mission. This was the final chapter in a story that would reshape everything they knew. "We've got to move faster," Mark muttered, breaking the silence. "The longer we wait, the more the broker and his associates are tightening the noose. Whoever this higher power is, we need to find them, and fast." Keanu nodded grimly. They were so close, yet everything felt farther than ever. The mystery that had begun with the simple idea of exposing one corrupt judge had escalated into a labyrinth of manipulation, deceit, and danger. They had the pieces, but the puzzle seemed too complex to solve in time. The safe house loomed ahead, another temporary hideout where they could regroup, but Keanu knew there wouldn't be much time for rest. The urgency of their mission pressed on him like a weight he couldn't escape. Inside the safe house, the team was ready. They had reviewed everything. The files they had found, the woman's cryptic warning, and the few clues that had managed to slip through the cracks. Keanu knew they were reaching the point where their options would run out. "We need to track down this higher power," Keanu said, his voice steady but firm. "If we're going to stop this, we have to find out who's really behind all of this. The broker is just a pawn. Whoever's controlling him is the real threat." Mark exchanged a glance with the others. "We've already got people searching," he said. "We'll find this person, but we need to act fast. We don't know who they are, but they're pulling strings we can't even begin to understand." Keanu's frustration bubbled to the surface. "We don't have time for another damn search. We need answers now. Who's the broker working for? And who's pulling their strings?" Just then the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tension in the room. Mark picked up immediately, his expression shifting as he listened to the voice on the other end. Keanu felt his heart race, knowing that whatever news was coming, it wouldn't be good. "We have a lead," Mark said, hanging up the phone. "It's a name that keeps coming up in the files we've been reviewing. Someone linked to Boasberg's judicial network." Keanu leaned in, hanging on every word. "Who?" Mark paused before answering, his voice low. "William Garver." The name hit Keanu like a punch to the gut. He had heard whispers of Garver before, rumors of a shadowy figure who operated in the highest echelons of power, but no one had ever been able to confirm his existence. Until now. "Garver," Keanu repeated, his mind racing. "Is he the one who's been behind all of this?" "We don't know yet," Mark replied, "but we need to find him. Garver's the key to everything, Keanu, the broker, Boasberg, everything. It all leads back to him." Keanu's hands clenched into fists. The puzzle was finally coming together, but the pieces were sharper than ever. They were running out of time, and the stakes had never been higher. Garver wasn't just a criminal. He was a power player, a shadow figure who had managed to stay out of sight for years. And now Keanu had to confront him. The team moved quickly, gathering the last of their intel and preparing for the final confrontation. The plan was simple, but it had one fatal flaw. No one knew where Garver was, but Keanu wasn't about to wait for a miracle. They had one chance to stop him, and he was going to make it count. They tracked Garver's operations to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city. The mansion was hidden in plain sight, surrounded by a large private property that no one dared to enter. The gates were tall and intimidating, security cameras placed every few feet, and guards patrolled the grounds like clockwork. "We're going to need to be quick and silent," Mark said, looking over the plan. "One slip-up and it's over." Keanu nodded. He had no illusions about the danger they were about to face. This wasn't just another raid. This was their last shot at bringing down the entire operation. If Garver wasn't stopped here, nothing would be able to stop him. The team moved through the darkened woods surrounding the mansion, staying in the shadows as they neared the compound. Keanu's heart was racing, and his breath came in quick, shallow bursts. They had made it this far. They couldn't fail now. As they approached the mansion's rear entrance, Keanu's thoughts shifted to the woman they had captured earlier. Her cryptic warnings, her calm demeanor, it all made sense now. She had known how far-reaching the power of the broker and Garver truly was. She had been a small part of a much larger system, one that was built on manipulation and control. Keanu glanced at Mark, who nodded, signaling for the team to move in. The time for questions was over. This was their moment. They reached the back door and Mark expertly disabled the security system. Inside, the mansion was quiet, too quiet. It felt like a tomb, the silence almost suffocating as they made their way through the opulent hallways. Keanu's senses were on high alert, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. The deeper they went, the closer they got to Garver. Finally, they reached a large, dimly lit study. Behind the desk sat a figure in a tailored suit, his back to them. He didn't move when they entered, and for a brief moment Keanu thought that maybe, just maybe, they had been too late. But then the figure turned, and Keanu was face to face with the man who had been pulling the strings all along. William Garver. He was older than Keanu had imagined, with a calculating gaze and a cold smile that made Keanu's blood run cold. The man didn't look like a criminal mastermind. He looked like any other well-dressed, powerful figure. But the aura of control that radiated from him was palpable. "So well, Garver said, his voice smooth and confident. "Keanu Reeves, I've been expecting you." Keanu felt his fists tighten, his mind racing. The game was over, but the question now was, who would come out alive? The final showdown has arrived. Keanu faces the elusive William Garver, the mastermind behind it all. But with everything on the line, who will emerge victorious? Will Keanu and his team stop Garver, or will they be swallowed whole by the web he has woven? The endgame is here. Share your predictions and thoughts below, and don't miss the thrilling conclusion in our next chapter.